Hello and welcome to another episode of the Revenue Revolution podcast, sponsored by Jointflows. Today we're joined by John Hammond. John has over 30 years of experience within sales and marketing, and now is advising a few companies as well. Welcome to the show, John. How are you?
I'm really well, thanks. Thanks for having me on, folks. I really appreciate it. Yeah, you said 30 odd years. Someone asked me the other day how many month ends I'd had. And I reckon it's 40. 400.
Yeah.
That pretty much terrified me.
There
Not
you
sure I'm
go.
ready for any more.
You've
There
closed
you
uh,
go.
you've closed a few quarters, John, in
I
your
have
in your life.
a few over the
Yeah.
years. Yeah, I hold all the scars and the traumatic experiences and all that kind of stuff. There's been tears and tiaras and everything.
Yeah, I bet we'll dig into some of those stories as well. But bring our listeners up to speed. Who is John Hammond? What do we need to know about you?
Well, number one, I'm a dad, so that's the most important job I have that I've had for the last 20 years. So I've been around in industry. I would say I'm 52, so I'm like old. I'm like old, right? So I'm so old that I was trained by IBM. So a really, really long time ago when IBM did training, right?
Yeah.
And we should talk about that a little bit later. So I did a lot of that traditional tech stuff. And then about 15 years ago, I came across a company called Rackspace, and I ran their cloud business and their install base and a whole load of other things. And that sort of transformed my knowledge of the modern tech space. Right, we were really early, really, there were no rules. We didn't really know how to do it. No one understood anything. So we were kind of half scientists, half salespeople. And that really transformed my knowledge of the market. So for the next however many years, 10, 15 years, I then spent in the SaaS marketplace, or we called it the cloud marketplace at the time, but now we call it the SaaS marketplace. And more recently, what I've decided to do is advise businesses, take all that knowledge, pay it forward a little bit, maybe reduce the pain of a few companies that I come across, and help them sort of break through a little bit based on what I've learned. And my little joke with it is I've pretty much done everything wrong. So I know what it's going to feel like when we go wrong, but I've occasionally got it right, and hopefully I can give you the benefit of that experience. So that's what I've been doing, and I love it. It's genuinely the right thing for me to do.
Amazing. I went on a podcast a couple of weeks ago as a guest, actually, instead of a host. And one of the questions they asked me was, what's one of the biggest mistakes you made that you learned from? And I was like, geez, I've made millions of mistakes over my career. I don't know a salesperson who has it. Yeah, exactly. Amazing. So you mentioned you're solving a lot of pain, or some pain, for some of your companies you're advising as well. Talk a little bit about that. You see commonalities in the pains that they're experiencing.
Yeah, let me give you some context first, and then we'll kind of get into it.
Yeah.
SaaS is different. It's different to traditional selling, or solution selling, as someone called it today. Solution selling, and one of the great things about IBM is you sit in front of a customer and go, what do you want to do? You want to build an airport? You want to count the bottles that come out of your bottling machine? Do you want to, do you want to put stop, manage your storage? Whatever you want to do, we can do it. And that's great because it allows you to go figure out the customer's requirements, all that kind of stuff. SaaS is different. You only can answer one problem, right? The whole point of SaaS is you've got a thing that you sell over and over again. It's the same thing. Otherwise the economics don't work, right?
Yeah.
But we sell it still like a solution, right? And then what happens is you get sucked into a tech sale, so it's features, and now you've commoditized yourself. And guess what? You end up signing 16 different customers, all of whom do slightly different things. And now you've got 16 products under the banner of SaaS. And I think that's what I see the most of out there, is companies trying to be SaaS companies with all the right intent, but sort of desperate for the revenue. So totally understandable scenario, right? So you take the customer that's closest to you, but the people facing the customer, you're not helping them, because actually what you've got to do is help them initiate that thing in the customer that says, you have this problem that you need to fix. I have a solution, but you still need to fix it whether you do it with me or not, right? And you have to do that in such a way that it forces them to act. And that, I think, is the key. That's the difference between SaaS and solution selling, is you've only got one thing to sell. You have to find the right customer. And it only works for the right customer. That's the reality of it. Other customers might find different ways of using it, and then you've got a new ICP, right? But your opening position has to be who is going to benefit from this. And so the commonality I see is most companies that I deal with are not clear about their customer, who the right customer is, the ICP, the ideal customer profile, but not just for today, but in the future. Because if you're doing it right, your install base growth will eventually outstrip your acquisition growth.
Yeah.
Because your install base gets so big and they're growing, whether net revenue, recurring revenue, whatever measure you want to put to it, that should be the way it goes. And the only way you can do that is by acquiring the right customers. So the first sign I look for in a company is, are your customers growing? And that's a symptom of a couple of things. The first of which, you've probably got the wrong customers, maybe some of the right customers, who knows, or you've got the wrong pricing model. We'll get to that. So for me, it starts with the ideal customer profile. So if you've got the right ideal customer, have you created a journey for them to go along to solve the problem that you've identified? Most companies have a journey that allows you to enable them to stand up and use your product, right? That's what most customer journeys look like. And pretty much everyone I've looked at, I've asked, where's the customer's view? What's the customer thinking at this point? What's the job they want to do? What are their emotions? What do they actually want out of this stage? What's the exit criteria for them? But it's all about us. And generally it's fixated on the sales process, but there's a huge process that goes on before, in terms of awareness and getting them to initiate with you. And then afterwards, once they've stood up, to help them grow, get consumption and usage and advocate and all that kind of stuff. But we focus really heavily on this acquisition piece, right? But that journey, if you get it right, will help customers consume. And the final bit, to what I'm terming the Trinity, so ICP customer journey is a pricing model that allows you to extract the full value from that customer, right? And often I see customers saying to me, and in fact, the last two I've spoken to, we haven't got our pricing right. Can we start there? That's the wrong end of the Trinity to start. Right? That's the end of the process. Let's be clear who the customer is. Let's see if we can go get them and bring them in. Because if you get the right customer, then your customer journey becomes relatively straightforward and consistent. Yeah. And unfortunately, what SaaS is going to bring you is a really boring outcome, which is you're going to have to do the same thing over and over again. It's boring, but incredibly profitable.
Yeah.
It's trying to get people to kind of understand that actually this is the whole idea of it being repeatable is that it is the same every time. And that's how you know it's working.
I completely agree with you. And I think we've done that mistake of trying to commercialize it before we knew who to drag into that journey. And then before we knew even who to target. So like we started the triangle from the wrong angle completely. And now we are making our way back to, okay, well, actually, this is who we should be selling to, and this is what we should be going through in order to, create.
And this is the problem we solve. That we solve this problem for these customers.
Yeah.
And if you find the right customer and the right problem, it works. And you don't need that many customers. If you look at most companies, and pretty much every company I've taken over as CRO or CCO, first thing I do is go and look at the customers. It's the number one thing. It's the number one asset in the company. It's the number, well, you can talk about people, but in terms of like what we're trying to achieve, it's the number one asset that we have available to us. If you look at it, most of the revenue comes from a very small number of those companies. The rest of it is at best net neutral outcome, right? They might pay you 25 grand, but it probably cost you about 25 grand to get them to here. Right?
Yeah.
Easily forgotten that perspective. So what you find is you don't actually need as many customers as you think. All those other customers are the wrong customers. So you've got to figure out how to either make them into the right customer or move on, but much more importantly, you don't need as many as you think, right? If you get the right customers and they grow, actually tens of customers are quite powerful. In B2B, it's not going to work in a B2C environment, but in B2B, tens of customers will do it. Right?
Yeah.
I'm working with one company at the moment. I'm saying you need 10 customers like this every half year. That's all you need. You do that for 3 years, you've got everything you want.
But do you feel like there's a push from VCs to sort out your monetization before you even know about your TAM and your ICP? Right? We went through this at a very small scale because it was business angels and like very early pre-seed VCs, if I can call them like that. But the set of questions we had was about monetization, was about commercialization, not the journey, not the ICP. So how much money are you gonna make and how fast are you gonna make it?
Yeah, well, is that I think that there's a realistic pressure that you get from investors. my response to that in the past has been, if you knew the answer, you'd tell me. So none of us know the answer, right?
Yeah.
But what I've got is a method of finding out. And that's the thing we're going to focus on, not the answer, because the answer will come, right? But the method that I'm going to work on is, here are the things that I need to understand in order to get to that method. What I do know is, in the SaaS world, things, you talk about commercialization, there are some basic principles, right? It has to be consumption-based. Otherwise, it's not really cloud, is it? It's not really SaaS, right? There's a utility concept around it, right? Electricity type concept around it.
Yeah.
How you get them into that and what that looks like, how that works, that's the trick, right? And so we know it's going to end up looking something like this, but how do we get it there? I'll give you an example. We're working with one company. If you look at their income, they've got a very low line for secured income, so contracted value. And they have this huge number, which goes up and down on the variable income. And that just says to me, well, you've priced too low. Just eat all that space. Just eat it all, right? But you can't do that without having that data, right? And so it's too easy to go to. It's too easy for someone to read off their list of 10 things that every company that there is in their portfolio must have. It's like, what's your monetization? And go, well, I have a monetization strategy. It's to learn this stuff to come up with a model that is consumption-based, right? And, the more of that consumption-based bit you can contract in order to flip around and give the consumer a better price or more security or whatever it is, the better, obviously. But it is essentially that route. So that hopefully that gives you some insight.
Yeah, that makes sense. One of the things you said earlier on is, and I see it a lot in many SaaS companies, in particular in the early days as well. And I think we've kind of done this as well, which is you try to be everything for everyone almost. We say that SaaS is, as you correctly said, is you're solving one problem, right? And you do it repeatedly. And if you can do that right, then you're going to have a successful business. So what's some of the advice you give to companies who do this? Because it's very difficult, when you're a startup, you're shooting from the hip, for one of the things that you're constantly thinking about is the runway that you have, right? How much runway do I have? If I get this money in the bank, whether it's the right fit for us or not, it's going to extend my runway, right? Yeah. So what's some of the advice you give to almost deter that behavior? Because what you're saying is right. You should be going for that one profile.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really tricky balance. Yeah. I'm really respectful of founders because they're doing something, or you guys are doing something that I don't do, right? I can't make a thought come into reality in the business world. I could take a piece of paper and put the right writing on it. So it's a different thing, right? So the trick is for me is to say, what are you learning through this process? You don't know who your customer is. And the notion that anyone can sit in a room and work out exactly who the customer is and go and acquire them is kind of insane, right? So you have to try. But my point to them always is, what are you learning through this process? What have you learned so far? You've got 30 customers. What have you learned? Because the reality is they're going to work it out for themselves. And the job of an advisor is to help them do it rather than do it for them, right? So that's the starting point. What have you learned from these customers? And they'll say, well, I've got 4 really good customers. And I've got 3 different models. It's okay. Well, how are you going to make that efficient? So for me, it's really about asking the right questions that lead people to improve their thinking rather than saying, don't do it. Right. Of course, they know not to do it. But, it's money, right? That's the reality. Yeah. The first bit of the business is getting it up and running and showing that someone will buy something, right? Yeah. And that you can't deter that because that's where all the energy is. What you've got to do is you can make it, I could bring the benefit of my experience and help them understand. Like you go for it, but learn stuff, learn something about this process that will make you better next time you do it. Yeah.
And then just one of the other things you had mentioned as well is you look and you say, right, are your customers growing? Right. Because obviously if your customers are growing, the chances are, I'm guessing it means you've got a good client there and hopefully you're going to get drive more value for them. And off the back of that, be able to get more money off them as well. But obviously, if you look in today's climate as well, the percentage of your potential customer base who are growing is a little bit lower than it used to be.
Yeah.
So what other criteria do you think is almost a mandatory to say, right, that should be your ICP almost?
Well, I think one of the most important bits, and it's really easy to overlook this, is, are you and the customer clear? Have you agreed that you're going to fix that, that thing? Does everyone know that that's the thing you're fixing?
Yeah.
And what is the measure by which you are all going to agree that it is fixed? What is the metric? What is the tangible thing that says this is better as a result of the engagement with us? Right? That, I think, is a really good starting place. If your customer can't articulate that, then it's on you to go figure it out. And there's lots of different clever ways of doing that. But if you can't identify that, my view is it's just not a great relationship, because at any point you can be replaced, because you and the customer haven't even agreed that you're fixing a specific problem for them, how you're going to do it and how it's going to be measured. If you're not having that conversation with your customers, then you've got a problem. And there are a lot of really great companies that do that, and they're really successful. Like, they hold those great customers because they know that. They might do that without really being that structured. They might just do it because it naturally feels right. That's okay too, right? But that's the key for me, is what is the version of that in your company that says, I understand that customer, the customer understands me, and we're working towards a common goal. If you do that, the money will come. It might not come in this climate. You might have got the wrong pricing model, but it will come because you're actually helping improve a customer. Gartner's research, there's a really brilliant set of articles on this. Gartner's research is really clear on it. They found that the effect of service on a customer, the thing that we do to make them feel happy and like us, does not have the same effect on growth on a customer, and that is buying more stuff, than actually helping them understand how you've improved their business. How cool is that? But it has the same effect on renewals as all the work does that you get for a renewal. And so this, in many ways, we've been building the wrong install base organizations, because actually what we've created is a system that stops shrinkage, holds the customer, whereas what we want to do is we want to grow the customer. And the skills that we ask our customers, the range of skills that requires from a customer success person are enormous. Most people don't have it. So you're asking them to do something that they're not even able to do. And so you've got this, so you create this scenario where your customers aren't growing, because the reason they want to grow is because they believe in your ability to improve their business. And the sales cycle of growth in an existing customer is exactly the same as an acquisition sales cycle. You've got a set of people that have to be convinced that they're going to make an investment to do something. And it's going to be different to what they do today. Whereas renewal is do the same thing again. Right?
See, we've got a lot of conversations internally about, and on the podcast as well, about when does the journey start? Because obviously it starts from the beginning. You get in touch, and then you convince, and then you sign, and then you expand, and you create that relationship. But this conversation seems to lead to the conclusion that really the beginning of the journey starts almost when the client has been signed already, and then that's the education about success metrics and all of that.
Maybe not quite right. Maybe I'm not positioning correctly, but I think actually where it starts, I think it's a good point. I think where it starts is when the customer looks out their window after a meeting and says, man, I got to fix a problem in my business. Right. That's when it starts. And what they're looking for at that point, their journey is, what are my options? They're not thinking about you. They're thinking about them. They're thinking about what are the options I have to solve this problem, or to grow my revenue, or to reduce my costs, or whatever it is, right? I mean, there's very few things that people want to do. They broadly fit in those categories, right?
Yeah.
That's the beginning. And that's why things like thought leadership, market awareness, talking around the subject, talking about ideas, that's why it's so critical, because you're capturing their imagination at that awareness stage. When they come to you, that's when you start to translate their requirement into your solution, right? But when you engage them as a human being, and that's I would say it's halfway through the journey, when you engage them as a human being, either with an SDR or a salesperson, the focus there has to be around helping them understand that they have this problem and they need to fix it. And to do that in a compelling enough way, they will act.
Yeah.
I've got a lot of podcasts like, here's the 16 things you do to get someone to respond to you. There's only one thing you need to do. That's to talk to them in a way that educates them on their business in a way that makes them act, right? And that is the company's responsibility, not the seller's responsibility, right? The sellers can give that information back, but the collateral material messaging has to come from the company to deliver that, right? When you're in the early stages and there's 3 of you on a floor and one of you is a CEO and all that kind of stuff, you know, you're all in it together. But once you want to scale that business out, then the company has to take responsibility for that conversation, right? I'll give you one tiny simple example of what we did at Rackspace. Did you know that for every half a second your page doesn't load on your website, you lose half the viewers? Customers thinking about it. How much do you spend on inbound demand, Mr. Customer? Oh, I spend 100,000 a year. Well, only 50 grand of that works because your page loads too slowly. Now he's got something to think about, or she's going to go away and tell her team, like, what? How quickly does our page load? Now you're talking about the problem, her problem, not your solution, her problem, right? And now you're having a conversation. Now you can start working on the thing, because we know that's the thing we want to fix, because that's what we do. That's what we do. We give you a better service at this particular thing. And that's what I mean with that.
I understand. Well, how do you, so when you go into a business as an advisor, what are the few questions you ask to get that diagnosis done and then start advising?
Yeah. So my first question is, what is it you do? And I ask everyone the same question, and I write down their answer verbatim. All right. Because the very first thing is everyone clear what they do?
Yeah.
And it is and I would encourage you to do it. It's for me, it's a fun exercise in any board meeting, right? Here's a piece of paper, you got 30 words or less. What is it that we do? And that's a really good starting place, because it then starts to tell you why there's disconnects between departments and divisions, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is, who do you do it for? Right? Who is the customer? And what is special about you? Right? Those 3 questions, they seem really simple. And there's, you know, I spent a lot of time thinking of all these technical questions, and they're all there, you know, like, what's your turnover? What's this ratio? What's that ratio? All that kind of stuff. But actually, if you understand those 3 things, then you're in a really good place. I think the final question for me is always, how do you want me to help? Like, what can I do to help you achieve your goal? Because the reality is, what I'm doing to them is what I've just explained that you do in the market, which is, what's the goal of your company? What's the thing that we're talking about, and how are you going to measure that it's, you know, I'm going to improve your company in this way. What's the measure that it's going to happen? Once I understand that, it's really straightforward. And in 90% of cases, because relatively early stage companies, it's, I want to increase my acquisition, right? Because when you're small, your install base is negligible, right? So actually what you've got to do is go acquire a load of customers, to go figure out who this ICP is and grow your business. And most of your revenue, incremental revenue, will come from acquiring new customers. So that's the buzz, right? You've got to go do that. And people spend a lot of money on that. But my position is always, very soon we're going to have to talk about the install base. Very soon we're going to have to talk about the customer base. Because if this is working, then you've got a much bigger opportunity in the install base that you're going to be able to get at in a much more efficient way. And in a time when capital is no longer cheap, right? Your return on capital is really, really important. And very quickly, return on capital is realized much better through the install base.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. No, one of the 3 elements you focus on, you said it's for the final pieces around the pricing, right? So it's getting the price, you know, have you been able to articulate what the value is that you're driving, and then off the back of that, build the pricing of it. And where I think I see a lot of companies struggle, and you could speak to this, is, you know, if you're in an area which even has 1, 2, 3 or more competitors, and you have, you know, you all of a sudden have a feature comparison going on, it almost becomes a race to the bottom somewhat as well, especially now, because, you know, it's very competitive. I think it's very rare that you'll have an opportunity where they're not researching the market to understand if there's another viable alternative there. Speak a little bit about that and kind of do's and don'ts in this scenario.
Yeah. Well, I think in no matter what you do, what version of selling, what era you're in, if you're in we called it feeds and speeds or features and benefits, like if you're in that component-led element, you're screwed, because it's top trumps, right? They'll pick the one with the top trump feature that they like the most, and it's not really in your hands then. And you're right, it's a race to the bottom, and you've commoditized yourself. Don't stand around saying that market's commoditized. You did it to yourself, right?
Yeah.
So the very, very first thing for me is that your sales and marketing has to be clear about your message in the market? What are you portraying? What are you fixing? What's the value of that, right? Example, international payments. You could easily say, actually, what we offer you is an international payments capability. Or you could say, I can increase your client lifetime value because I can get you a product faster than you can build it that you can sell to your existing customers, right? Pick your message, because immediately you'll start to elevate yourself because you're offering value rather than components, right? Those component pieces they're irrelevant, but they shouldn't be near the top of that thinking, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's the first thing, is what message are you portraying in the market? Because if you're portraying a commoditized view of the market, then you're going to get what you deserve, right? The second thing is, if a customer says, what's the price? You've got to be very, very clear. And that is, we don't give the price out until we understand what we're dealing with, because the price can vary depending on your requirements, right? What the customer's trying to do, it's an old trick. It happened to me when I was quite young, actually. It never happened again, though. I've really learned. And then I learned from an old rep at the time, and he said, "Oh, you've just been bacon sliced, mate." And that's when you kind of thin slices off the rump, you know.
Yeah.
So, take a little bit. What they're trying to do is say, right, well, that's my cap. How do I get you down? You don't want those customers. You want the customers. You want to position your customer in such a way that they have to buy it. It doesn't really matter how much it costs, because the value that they see is greater than whatever it's going to cost, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to have the conversation with the customer. You've got to slow it right down and start talking to them about, I've noticed in companies of your type, these are the challenges. Does that resonate with you? Right? Yes, it does. Okay. Because again, we are challenging the customer, and you're trying to poke the customer rather than this, which is now, I think, a little outdated. Tell them about your biggest business issues, right? It's a little bit of an outdated model. And actually the response of companies was to create a procurement department with special bids, right? Because actually, here's all the information you're going to ask me. There it is. Now bid in the dark. Right? And what you want is that relationship. So you've got to educate the customer. You've got to educate them on their business, and that you know them and you understand their business. Once you do that, you're starting to create some differentiation between yourself and your competitors immediately. And you don't have to build anything to do that. You just have to understand that customer. Go back to the concept of the ICP. If you've got the ICP right, your messaging works. So that's how I would do it. What I wouldn't do is, I think it's, until you've really nailed it, I wouldn't put your pricing on the website. I know it feels bold and open and transparent and all those kind of good sort of things, but until you've nailed it, you're gonna have to put a new page up every 6 months, right? Because you're gonna be constantly changing it. Yeah. Right. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I wouldn't, I've always ended up selling the most expensive thing. And IBM was always the most expensive thing. Rackspace was the most expensive thing. Wherever I've been, it's been the most expensive version. You have to be clear about how you get from where you are now to high value. At Rackspace, all about service. Yes, anyone can offer you hosting, but look at the service wrapper we put around it. Look at the investment we've put in it. That's why we're more expensive. And here's the value to you, right?
Yeah.
You are a so-and-so e-commerce business. You are not going to know what to do when it goes wrong, right? You need to be with the people that deliver service at the highest level, because that keeps your business going. That if you do those kind of things, it's much healthier than trying to get to a proposal to close a customer, right? Slow is fast, if you like, right? So my advice is generally to slow customers down, because the quicker they get to the price, the quicker you're commoditized.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Mick mentioned earlier on, we almost went the wrong way around in the triangle, as it were.
You didn't speak to me in time. That's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things that we think about a lot is our price point, our pricing model. Is it reflective of the value that we drive? Should it be more? Should it be less? And so forth. How many data points, and I don't know if there's a very binary answer to this, but what do you need to see in the business, or how many data points, or what is it that we need in order to be in a position where we can say, okay, that's enough. Off the back of this, I feel like we now understand what the pricing should be.
Okay. So let me start with kind of the general concept of price management. I've now, my career, I've requested 3 pricing studies done by an external agency to look at our marketplace. I'm not going to do it anymore because they all come back with the same thing. You can charge significantly more for your product than you believe you can, right?
Yeah.
So that's the starting point. That's the starting point for me, is that there is value. There's way more value in your product than you believe it. You're either a bit worried that you're going to lose competitive advantage, or you're not, or you're worried that someone will come in cheaper or something like that. So it's a concern of yours. The reality is people are willing to pay more for the right product, because, you know, we've all bought a lot of things that don't work, right? But you know, ask me how much I pay for Spotify, and I'll just be like, take as much money as you want, because I need Spotify, because it's too good not to have, right? I think that at the very least, you need 40, 50 customers that have bought your product, right? That's the absolute, in B2B world. In B2C world, it's significantly more, right? B2B world, 40, 50 people that have bought your product. That's the first thing, right? You need a good couple of years of data. And then you need to be able to map out what that customer bought, what they ended, you know, so you've got to kind of normalize the data so you can start to see what the patterns are, right? Now that, you know, good data analysis, a lot more data, better analysis, right? The challenge is you're not going to have more data. You've only got the data that you've got. So that goes back to the framework. What are you trying to learn? What are you trying to learn from your customers? What I'm trying to learn is, why do they buy? Why do they buy more? Right? Why aren't they buying anyone else's? And of the customer, what's a good customer look like? What's a bad customer look like? Purely in income terms, right? Because then you're then pulling, you know, you can get too lost in all the different layers. If you just look at it as income or growth or however we want to do it, but just ARR or MRR, however you choose to do it, if you look at those data points, then you've got a pattern. Then you can start thinking about it. But this isn't pure data analysis. You actually have to go and talk to customers. I know, right? Yeah. It's insane. This idea that you're speaking to customers, they might tell you what they want, but that is the number one thing you have to do. Once you've got that, you've got a sense of it, then build some basic questions, go speak to customers. You don't need many. 5 or 6 will do it, because you'll start to realize the patterns that come out, right? I'll give you an example. I worked for one company. We did a lot of work on foreign exchange, and that's a highly commoditized marketplace, right? So anyone could pretty much sell foreign exchange. It's unregulated. It's the only bit of the finance market that's unregulated. The payment to you and away from you is regulated, but the actual FX isn't. But our largest part of our business was same currency payments. So I've got a diminishing margin over here, and then my largest growth line is something that doesn't involve a foreign exchange transaction. So I can't make any money on it. And so the whole model was to flip it round to say, actually, we're going to charge you for the tech and the volume. We don't care what the volume is that you put over it. We don't care if you're changing it or you're just using the platform. We don't care if you're exchanging it. If you put this volume over it, then we're charging you. But because there was nothing like us, there is no fear of replacement. So actually, you've got an inelastic position, whereas you're highly elastic in the FX space, because anyone could do it. You know, it's like matches. You put the price up on a 2p on a box of matches, no one's buying them, right? You put 100 grand on a Ferrari, doesn't make any difference. No one cares. Oh, it's even more exclusive, right? Yeah. And so it's trying to figure out, you know, what's the point of it? What's the thing that you've got that's special? Or how can you charge for it? In our case, it was the platform that was special. No one else was doing it at the time. So we charge for the use of the platform rather than the things that you did on it, right? And then we built a pricing model that was like, here's the cheap, you can have a 30-day rolling contract with us. So if you just want to try it, just try it. It's £1,000 a month. It's a 30-day rolling contract, just try it. And the conversion from those was about 90-something%. And then as soon as you get them into the system, you say, well, actually, if you prepaid and bought a multi-year contract, it would make this level you're at cheaper per unit. And now you've got now you're taking them on that journey with you, right? You're giving them value back. You're starting to use it, you're getting real value from it. But this part of the journey, we're showing you how you get more value from us. Did you know that you could use this feature? Because you're already paying for it, because you're paying for the volume. Now, if you use more features, you get more value. That's how you build that journey, Mark. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you.
I've got a question around, because I really love the Trinity framework you're mentioning, and I think like you have to do it. You have
Oh
to
yeah,
do
it'll
it.
go on my blog in the next few weeks.
Yeah, but as a company, you have to do it, and the earlier the better, because that's the right way around.
Yeah.
But I'm assuming that you get to fight against a lot of strong-headed CEOs who have, built that thing from scratch, and now they have to look at it from a different angle, and it's very discomfortable. How do you manage this?
Well, go back to my earlier comment, traditionally very badly. But I've learned a lot over the years, and either I'm getting mellower or they're getting mellower, I don't know. But I think the first thing is go back to what I said. I think you just have to be respectful of a founder and make sure that they understand that you're trying to help them. Like, I'm here to help you get better, and you can either take my advice or not, right? That's entirely up to them. But it is incumbent on me to help them understand and see what great performance looks like. And so we can pick companies. It's a really simple trick. What are your favorite companies? Let's go and use them as case studies. Let's go and have a think about those. What I'm trying to do at that point is I'm trying to build some rapport with this person, trying to understand them a little bit, trying to help them understand how I think and learn how they think. And that's incredibly powerful, because you can look at a company and go, well, who do you think their customer is? And then you kind of work through that, and then they kind of realize for themselves. That's much more powerful. The kind of power of inception is much more powerful than the power of telling, right? And that is just, that's just about, that's probably I learned a lot of that when I started doing coaching, is trying to learn how to help people come to their own conclusions. Because if you go head to head with a founder, like, they're going to win. They've got the company. It's theirs. It's not even a fair contest. So why get into the fight? Now, when I was younger, I would get into the fight because I was absolutely right. What I've learned is I absolutely am not right, but I might be slightly closer to being right than you, just tiny bit. And that, you've got to just be a bit humble about it and just be honest with people and say, look, this is what I've learned works. Here's the symptoms of it. Let's have a look at your company. You've got the symptoms. Let's go figure out how we solve it. And be there, be someone who enables them. Because otherwise, it's the worst kind of advisor that walks in and starts strutting around and going, you over there, make me a cup of tea. You're doing it wrong. The worst thing in the world, right?
Yeah, the old John reminds me of Mick of 5 years ago. Very good presentation. He's really mellowed out though, so it's helped.
You have to. It's tiring as well. Like, you don't want to have the fight.
It's tiring not to be mellow.
Yeah,
that's true. Who needs to waste that energy? I had one more question around pricing, John. And it's always intrigued me where I see within the same space, I see some companies who offer a freemium model, removing the barriers to entry, and then I see their competitors are not, right? And it's like, well, what's going on over here? Where do you see scenarios where freemium model is appropriate and where it's not? It's quite a broad question, but
yeah. I mean, look, it works much better for me. It works much better in the consumer space.
Yes,
right? Because actually, you're just trying to get them to use it, right? And that's SaaS. Just get them to use it. My dad used to sell photocopiers, and the number one way of selling it was to get them to do a trial, to stick it on the floor, get them using it, and it never comes home, right? There's nothing new here. Okay, so the freemium work, to my opinion, works really well in B2C, but it does work in B2B. I've done it. It tends to be very sandboxy, or use it to do this, but it has to be really tight. It has to be really small, because the people that are paying for your product can see it too. Right? And they want to be clear that there's a jump, and so you're trying to pull them across. I'm not a huge fan myself. I'd much rather create a smaller package. But I've told you the £1,000 a month thing. I'd much rather create that and give them real flexibility. I'm a big believer in not holding someone to their, like, if you're not happy in this contract, I'm not going to force you to pay the remaining 11 months. It's just insane. All that, talk about negative energy, like how much of negative energy is that? It didn't work out with this company. I'd much rather they went into the market and went, it didn't work out, but they were really cool guys. Right? They really made it, it didn't work out, and they accepted it and let me move on. So I think, go back to that kind of concept. I think you're better off having a smaller package that's really, really affordable. But the freemium model works really, really well if you've got a unique thing that everyone needs, and then it leads to the big thing. Because don't forget, all of your value is in your SaaS product, and the SaaS when they work really well, they're not just software. They've got some operational bits in it as well. There's some service in there and some people and stuff like that. That's the big differentiation. So that's my preference. But unless you can lock it down, then people are just using your product for free.
Yeah. John, I could speak to you forever. It's very, very insightful, and I've taken a couple of pages of notes while I've been speaking to you. But it is time to wrap up. So we do have one final question as well. If you've listened to a couple of episodes, you'll see it coming and may have prepped for it. But throughout your whole illustrious career to date, what is your favorite memory and why?
I did hear it. I didn't prepare because I ended up doing something else. But I did think I'm going to tell you the thought I had went straight into my mind when I heard you ask it.
Yeah.
My favorite memories are always of teams when they've been successful, of that feeling of being in a successful team. Those are my memories. I don't remember what we were doing. I don't really remember the tough times. What I remember is we did it together, that feeling of being part of something that was successful.
Yeah.
And, I've been in lots of teams. I've worked in lots of companies, but, maybe 5 times, 4 times when you can stand back and you go, wow, we made something out of us. Before we were here, this feeling wasn't here. This success wasn't here. This, whatever we did just didn't exist. And we did it. We just a group of human beings did it. And I think there's something really magical about that. And those are my favorite memories. Absolutely
amazing. Reminds me of a time when Mick was leading the team at the company we worked together in a Christmas party. He got up on the table and gave a big speech after being heavily intoxicated. So
I don't know how I even got to the table to start with. I'm not good at Christmas parties.
No, that's a good answer though. It's something that I hear from many people who are leaders within their professions. Often the answers are rooted around a group collective as opposed to
all about
individual.
people. It's all about
people. Absolutely. Well, look, John, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. We've had a very good time with you, so appreciate it. This has been the Revenue Revolution podcast. Until next time, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.
Bye.